My name is Grace Taylor, and I'm 30. For as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one. I don't mean I'm dull or unadventurous. I mean I plan, I anticipate, I secure. In a world full of surprises, I prefer being 3 steps ahead. My career as a logistics strategist for a major shipping firm has trained me to spot patterns, predict chaos, and ensure everything runs smoothly. Financially, I've made smart decisions early, saved meticulously, and invested wisely. Comfortable isn't extravagant, but it's secure, and for me, security has always been worth more than sparkle. I thought I was planning a life with Anthony Jones, my fiancé. He's 36, charming, ambitious, and easy to love, or so I believed. Anthony has a daughter, Madison, 26, from a previous marriage. Together, we were merging not just our lives, but our finances, our families, and our futures. I had poured trust, money, and emotional labor into this partnership, believing in the narrative of us. It all started to crack during a celebratory dinner last Tuesday. We were at a dimly lit restaurant, polished wood tables, the soft clink of wine glasses in the background, the kind of place where every detail felt deliberate. I had just closed a significant logistics contract at work, a win that meant more responsibility and a substantial commission. I was proud, and for a moment, I let myself relax. "You're brilliant, Grace," Anthony said, swirling his glass of wine with that easy, confident smile. "I don't know what I'd do without you. Honestly, I don't need to worry about the future with you around." I smiled, feeling the warmth of his praise, the familiar comfort of being recognized. But then, there was a glint in his eyes. A bright, hard, possessive flash, just for a moment. It shouldn't have registered, but it did. My mind, trained to analyze, instantly cataloged it. I caught myself thinking about the little things I'd ignored, how Anthony had become less involved in his own financial planning after we got serious, how his daughter Madison casually asked about my investments when we visited, how decisions about the wedding were always made with the expectation that I would cover the costs. A pattern emerged, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. I brushed it off with a nod, a practiced smile, yet in my chest, something shifted. That night, while the city lights shimmered outside our apartment window, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the dinner scene in my mind over and over. Was it just a joke? Or was it a hint at something deeper, something dangerous to everything I had built? By morning, my decision was clear. This wasn't paranoia. It was planning. I needed to protect what was mine. Not because I didn't trust Anthony, but because love, no matter how deep, doesn't guarantee foresight. I had to act before assumptions became liabilities. I started with my finances. Not a word to Anthony, not yet. I scheduled a meeting with a trusted financial advisor who specialized in asset protection. Every detail mattered: investments, savings, emergency funds, anything that could be considered marital property in the wrong hands. As I walked into that office, a quiet resolve settled over me. This wasn't betrayal, this was survival. The advisor explained the options. One stood out: an irrevocable trust. It sounded extreme at first. Assets no longer mine, untouchable even in a divorce, but the logic was flawless. This trust would secure my financial independence, shield what I had worked for, and ensure that no one's entitlement could disrupt my future. I left the meeting with a clear plan, a list of steps, and a calm determination. In my apartment, I sat at my desk, the city lights casting shadows across spreadsheets and documents. Love, I realized, was fragile. Planning, strategy, and foresight, that was unbreakable. Later that week, I casually brought up the idea of a prenup with Anthony. I framed it as a responsible, adult precaution. "It protects both of us," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "It's about fairness, about security for our shared future." Anthony froze. The warmth in his eyes flickered. Madison's brow furrowed. Even their family lawyer looked at me like I'd just suggested something unthinkable. But I didn't falter. I had anticipated this. My words were measured, my demeanor controlled. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and let myself feel the smallest ripple of sadness. I had loved this man, trusted him with more than just my heart. But love alone doesn't protect you from those who see generosity as weakness. My mind, however, had no room for doubt. The trust was being set up, quietly, efficiently. By the time any confrontation came, I would already be 2 steps ahead. Some people say that love is blind. I say love is beautiful, but planning sees everything. And sometimes the first spark of distrust isn't the end, it's the beginning. The next morning, I woke with a quiet resolve that felt almost foreign. Love, as I had known it, was no longer a shield. It was a potential vulnerability. The luxury of trust could no longer be assumed. I dressed carefully, not for a dinner or a celebration, but for a meeting that would define the boundaries of my life. The financial advisor's office smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, a comfort in its orderliness. I explained everything: my assets, my investments, the house, even the emergency fund. I laid out my life in numbers, spreadsheets, and meticulous notes, leaving nothing to chance. He listened without judgment, eyes flicking over statements and calculations with professional calm. Then he outlined the solution that felt like a revelation: the irrevocable trust. Everything you put in this trust, he explained, is no longer legally yours. It belongs to the trust. You can be a beneficiary, but it can't be claimed in a divorce. It's absolute. Think of it as a fortress. A fortress. The word echoed in my mind. I could almost see the high stone walls, the moat, the drawbridge. Not for treasure, not for gold, but for my future, my independence, and the life I had painstakingly built. The logistics of moving assets were tedious but comforting. I transferred stocks, savings, the down payment I had earmarked for our dream house, even the smaller, sentimental accounts that Anthony had never thought to notice. Each transaction was a quiet act of self-preservation. The law, I realized, was on my side, but only if I was clever enough to use it. By the end of the week, the structure was in place. I was no longer vulnerable. Not really. Not to emotional manipulation or entitlement, but the hardest part wasn't the legal maneuvering. It was imagining the fallout. Anthony and his mother would notice. They would rage. They would accuse. And yet, I felt a cold calm settle over me, a clarity I hadn't expected. When I suggested the prenup to Anthony, I framed it as a precaution, a responsible adult step. It's standard, I said. A prenup protects both of us. It ensures fairness and security for our shared future. Anthony's smile faltered. Madison's eyes widened. I could sense the first stirrings of disbelief, of rage, simmering just beneath the surface, but I did not waver. That evening, alone in our apartment, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I thought of every sacrifice I had made, every dollar lent, every careful plan executed to support a future that, as it turned out, might not have been mutual. Love, I realized, had always been a risk. Planning was survival, and now, survival required action. Even as I prepared the documents, I imagined Anthony's reaction, his charming grin giving way to confusion, then disbelief, then perhaps even anger. His mother, ever the protector, would descend like a storm. But none of that mattered. Not yet. The fortress had been built. The first piece in a game of strategy was complete. And in the quiet of that night, I let myself feel something I hadn't admitted before, a small, sharp thrill. For the first time in months, the uncertainty of the future was under my control. The prenup meeting was set in a beige, sterile conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and polished floors. I arrived early, reviewing my notes, my voice calm, my mind sharper than it had been in months. Across the table sat Anthony, his mother Madison, and their lawyer, a slick man named Gary. I could feel the tension radiating from them like static electricity, and for the first time, I allowed myself to relish the control I held in that room. Gary slid a stack of papers toward me. "These are our notes on the prenup," he said smoothly. "We feel a 50-50 split of all assets, and future earnings is more than fair, especially considering Grace has been handling most of the finances." I lifted an eyebrow but said nothing. Madison's lips pressed into a tight line. I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment before my lawyer, Ms. Albright, spoke. "Thank you, Gary. That's informative. However, there's a critical piece of information you need to understand. Ms. Foster has recently restructured her finances for estate planning purposes." Gary blinked. Madison's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. My heart rate was steady, but inside, a thrill ran like electricity. Ms. Albright explained the irrevocable trust in painstaking, precise terms. Every asset I had worked for, transferred, and secured was legally untouchable. Anthony and Madison stared at me as though seeing a stranger. Their plans, their expectations, crumbled in the quiet authority of the law. "You did what?" Madison finally hissed, her voice sharp. "I moved my assets for long-term security," I said calmly. "It's responsible. It ensures that what I've built stays protected, regardless of circumstances." Gary sputtered, his smug demeanor faltering. "This is highly unusual. It could be seen as an attempt to hide assets." "Legally, it isn't," Ms. Albright cut him off. "It's a registered, irrevocable trust. Assets are not hidden. They simply no longer belong to Ms. Foster. They cannot be claimed in divorce proceedings now or ever. The prenup will apply only to future earnings, which Ms. Foster is happy to divide fairly." The room fell silent. Madison's face flushed from confusion to rage. Anthony's charming facade cracked, revealing the flicker of genuine shock and anger. "You mean she gave it all away?" Madison whispered, horror in her tone. "Yes," I said evenly. "Everything I placed in the trust is legally out of reach. Everything else we negotiate fairly." Madison's voice rose. "A team? You tricked her. You let her plan this beautiful life with you while pulling the rug out from under her." I let her anger wash over me. Inside, I catalogued every reaction, every shift in posture, every twitch of her hands. Fear, entitlement, disbelief, they were all laid bare. I had anticipated every argument, every tactic, every emotional plea. Anthony's voice, usually so smooth, cracked. "Undo it," he demanded. "I can't," I said simply. "It's irrevocable." Madison slammed her hand on the table. "Then we're not signing this prenup." "That's your choice," Ms. Albright said, serene. But no prenup, no wedding. They stormed out. Gary mumbled apologies and scurried after them. I stayed behind, listening to their voices fade. The storm of entitlement and rage hung in the air, but I felt a strange calm. Later, alone, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. My heart ached, not for the lost love, but for the illusions I had held. Anthony's charm had been real, but so had the deception, the entitlement that had now collided with my careful planning. I looked out the window at the city lights thinking, love alone doesn't protect you. Strategy does. Preparation does. Logic does. And tonight, I had won a battle that felt impossible until I accepted the rules of the game. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. Anthony and Madison didn't simply accept defeat, they escalated. 2 weeks after the prenup meeting, I came home from work to find Anthony sitting on my couch. He still had a key, a fact I had assumed would be irrelevant after the prenup fiasco. His eyes were stormy, but something felt off. "I can't believe you," he whispered, voice shaking. "I thought we were building a life." I noticed the absence of small things. My grandfather's hand-carved wooden birds, each one a memory, a story, a fragment of my childhood. My blood ran cold. "Where are the birds?" I asked, my voice low, steady, dangerous. Anthony's face hardened. "Safe. I'll return them when you dissolve that trust and give me the security I deserve." I didn't yell, I didn't plead, I looked at him as though he were a stranger. "Get out," I said, my voice measured. "Now, or I will call the police." He hesitated, then left, clutching the last of his dignity. The next day, I changed the locks. But the attacks didn't stop. Certified letters arrived, demanding the return of gifts, designer bags, vacations, even a collection of antique carvings valued at tens of thousands. They attempted to attach a price tag to sentiment, to assert control through chaos. I calmly forwarded the letters to my lawyer. Ms. Albright drafted airtight responses, every claim denied, every contract clarified, every responsibility placed firmly on Anthony and Madison. Vendors who had once smiled politely now confronted Madison directly, holding her accountable for unpaid deposits and extravagant upgrades she had authorized. It was a chess game, and for every move they made to destabilize me, I countered with precision. They had assumed emotion would guide my decisions. They hadn't considered logic, preparation, and legal protection. Even messages from mutual friends, designed to isolate me, backfired. The truth was documented. Every payment traced, every contract signed, every responsibility clear. The narrative of betrayal, so carefully spun by Anthony and Madison, dissolved under the weight of evidence and strategy. Weeks later, a package arrived. No note, just a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, were my grandfather's wooden birds, each one intact. Alongside them was the engagement ring, returned in full. I placed the birds back on the mantel and held the ring loosely in my hand, feeling neither triumph nor joy, just quiet. I had protected my life, my legacy, my sanity, but the cost was clear. 2 years of hope, love, and trust had evaporated. I had learned that some battles aren't fought with patience or charm. They are fought with foresight, calculation, and unwavering resolve. Sitting in the silence of my apartment, I reflected on the lessons etched into these months of conflict. Love is vulnerable. Trust is precious, but insufficient. Strategy is survival. Some wars are won, not with fire, but by building a fortress so solid that those who attempt to breach it collapse against its walls. I wasn't happy. I wasn't vindicated. I was just safe, whole, and finally in control of my life. And for a planner like me, that was everything.